Hello everyone, hope you're having an amazing day. Today we're diving into a story where the amnesic man, Tieu's uncle, returns with no memories of who he used to be, yet Tieu and little Dewey might be the key to unlocking his past. And if you enjoy it, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next video. A few days passed, and just when Tieu started wondering if he'd actually come back, she saw a familiar silhouette at the gate. He looked worn down, like the road had squeezed every last drop of energy out of him. Dust clung to his shoes, his shoulders sagged a little, and his eyes carried that faraway look people get after too many miles and too little rest. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something steady in him, like he'd been holding on to one simple thought the whole way. I'm going back there. Before Tieu could even say a word, Dewey spotted him. The kid shot off the porch so fast his sandals slapped the ground. "Uncle, you're back!" he yelled. Like this was the most normal thing in the world. Like of course he came back. And in that single moment, the whole yard changed. The man's tiredness didn't vanish, but it softened. His mouth curled into a small smile and the tension in his face eased like Dewey's voice had loosened a knot inside him. Tieu opened the door wider and waved him in. "Come inside," she said quickly. "It's cold. You're going to get sick dressed like that." Inside, she didn't waste time. She brought out fruit she'd saved. Strawberries and bananas, washed and arranged neatly. Dewey climbed up beside the man and started peeling a banana with dramatic seriousness. Like this was a job only grown-ups could handle. "Try the strawberry," Dewey insisted, holding one up like a trophy. "It's sweet, really sweet." The man took it, bit into it and paused. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Yeah," he said, surprised. "That's really good." Dewey grinned like he'd just won something. "See, I told you." Tieu watched them from the kitchen doorway, and something in her chest eased. The house had felt too quiet the past few days. Not empty exactly. She had Dewey, but quiet in the way that reminds you you're carrying everything alone. She walked over and pressed a folded jacket into the man's hands. "Put this on," she said. "The wind cuts right through you at night." He hesitated, almost like accepting warmth was something he didn't deserve. Then Dewey tugged his sleeve. "Wear it, Uncle. Mum says it's cold." That word, Mom, hit the room softly. Not because it was new, but because it was so natural. The man's eyes flickered, not with panic, but with a faint, startled confusion. Like a memory tried to rise and couldn't quite make it to the surface. He put the jacket on anyway, and Tieu noticed something immediately. He looked different. Not just warmer, more like himself. The jacket fit him well, and suddenly he didn't look like a stranger passing through. He looked like someone who belonged here. Dewey stared at him, eyes wide. "Whoa," he said, proud of his own opinion. "You look handsome." The man let out a quiet laugh. "Handsome?" "Yes," Dewey said, completely confident. "Like a hero?" Tieu couldn't help smiling. "A hero, huh?" she echoed, half teasing, half soft. They ended up on the floor after that, Dewey dragging out his toys and demanding playtime like it was a scheduled appointment. The man, still stiff from travel, still clearly tired, played anyway. He rolled a toy car back and forth, pretended to lose dramatically, even made a shocked face when Dewey defeated him in a silly game. Tieu sat nearby, watching. She didn't say much at first, because she didn't want to interrupt whatever calm had settled over the room, but eventually the truth slipped out the way it always does when you're tired enough. "It's been me and Dewey since he was a baby," she said quietly. "Since he was so small he could barely hold his head up. Sometimes I think he doesn't even realise how tiny our world is." Dewey looked up instantly. "Our world isn't tiny," he argued, offended on principle. "We have the garden, and the river, and the market, and the school." Tieu smiled at him. "Yeah, and we have you." The man glanced at Tieu, then at Dewey. "That's a lot to carry alone," he said, voice low. She nodded once, and the nod carried more exhaustion than she wanted it to. "When you helped before, it made things easier," she admitted. Dewey got to go to school. The teacher stopped asking me for money every week. I could breathe. The man's gaze dropped to his hands. "I still don't remember anything," he said, like an apology he'd been swallowing for days. I wish I did. I know, Tieu said quickly, but you came back. That matters. Dewey leaned against the man like it was normal, like this was where he was supposed to be. You came back, Dewey repeated, turning it into a promise. That evening, Tieu invited him to stay for dinner. You don't have to, he said, standing awkwardly like he might leave out of habit. I can find somewhere. No, Tieu cut in, not harshly, just firm. Stay. Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. She moved into the kitchen, already feeling that familiar heaviness in her bones, the kind of tired that doesn't come from one hard day, but from months of doing everything without relief. He followed her anyway. Let me help. You just got here, she said, trying to push him toward the chair. Sit down. But he didn't sit. He rolled up his sleeves and started working like his body remembered the routine even if his mind didn't. He rinsed vegetables, lined things up, found the knife without asking. It wasn't clumsy help either. It was the kind of help that looks practiced. What do you usually cook? He asked. Whatever's easy, Tieu said. Dewey likes cabbage rolls. He'll eat them without complaining. At the word cabbage, Dewey appeared like magic. Cabbage rolls, he announced like he'd been summoned. Yes, the man smiled. Then cabbage rolls it is. As they worked, he asked about life the way people do when they care but don't want to pry too hard. Do you manage the garden alone? He asked. Tieu let out a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Most days, yeah. The elder visits sometimes, but not often. The garden looks pretty from far away, but it's heavy work. Some days I feel like the weeds grow faster than I can pull them. He nodded slowly, listening. Dewey will grow, he said. He'll help you. I hope so, Tieu replied. I want him to be strong, smart, and less sickly than last winter. He paused, then asked carefully, Is Dewey your son? Yes, Tieu said without hesitation. He's my son. The man's eyes lingered on Dewey, on the way the kid hovered close, on the way he kept offering fruit pieces like he was feeding someone he loved. The kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and onions hitting the pan. The warmth of it wrapped around them, turning the room into something safe. Tieu set fresh cabbage on the counter. I harvested these today, she said, from the garden. He glanced around. You built all this? She shook her head. Not alone. The house. You asked a carpenter to build it, a long time ago. The garden, though, I did that little by little. He froze for half a second. I asked a carpenter, he repeated, frowning like the words pressed against something inside him. You don't remember? Tieu asked softly. He shook his head, frustrated. It's like I can feel there's something there, but when I reach for it, it's gone. Tieu kept her voice gentle. Maybe it'll come back slowly. He swallowed and went back to mincing meat, quieter now. Then, after a long pause, he asked something that shifted the air again, like a door creaking open. Back then, who was I, he said, before I disappeared, before the wound? Tieu looked at the stove flame flickering under the pot and chose her words carefully. You were police, she said, not just an officer. You had rank, and then you vanished after a bullet wound. He stared at her, the colour draining from his face. A bullet, he whispered. Tieu nodded once. Yeah, and there's an agency nearby, your colleagues, they were worried. They still are. His eyes dropped to the cutting board, and for the first time that night the warmth in the room mixed with something colder, something unfinished. And that's when the night began to change. For a while, he didn't speak. He just sat there with the knife in his hand, not threatening, not angry, just tense, like his body remembered danger even if his mind couldn't explain it. The stove crackled softly. Garlic and onions kept sizzling, filling the kitchen with a warm, steady smell, like the room itself was trying to keep the past from swallowing the present. Tieu didn't rush him. She stayed busy, separating cabbage leaves, moving carefully around the silence the way you step around a sleeping animal. Finally he exhaled. So, there's an agency nearby, he asked, voice low. Not far, Tieu said. A short walk. You had colleagues there. When you first showed up here, they were looking for you. His brow furrowed. And they never found me? They didn't, she said gently. Not at first, and even later. Things were complicated, he swallowed. Do they still think I'm alive? Some of them do, Tieu said. Some probably gave up, but the ones who cared, they were worried, confused. You don't just disappear, not when you had rank. He stared at the counter like he was trying to force a memory to appear. High rank, he repeated quietly, testing if it felt real in his mouth. Tieu watched him, then softened her tone. Do you remember your old home? She asked. He blinked like the word hurt. Home, he murmured. No, I get flashes sometimes. A door, a hallway, a sound like metal clinking, but nothing clear. If you ever want to look for it, I can take you, Tieu said. But don't rush. You're not ready for everything that comes with that. He looked at her. What do you mean? Tieu hesitated, then said it honestly. Recovery isn't just remembering. Your head injury, that scar, it affects things. The doctor said surgery was important, but even with surgery, memory can take time. He lifted a hand toward his head like he could feel the scar through his hair. Sometimes it aches, he admitted, like a warning. I've thought about having you re-examined, Tieu said, but hospitals bring questions. His eyes sharpened slightly. Questions like where I've been. Exactly, she said. And you're not ready to answer. He let out a small, bitter laugh. I'm not even ready to know. The quiet that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy in the way two people feel when they're standing at the edge of the same deep water. Then he did something simple, like he was trying to anchor himself back to the present. He went back to the food. He mixed the minced meat with seasoning, hands moving with a practiced rhythm. He rolled the mixture into neat portions and began folding cabbage leaves around them carefully. His technique was steady. Too steady for someone who claimed he didn't remember much of anything. Tieu couldn't help noticing. You're good at that, she said softly. He didn't look up. I learned chores from my foster mother, he said. Back when I didn't have anyone else. Tieu's eyes softened. She took care of you, he nodded. I remember her more than anything. The forest, foraging, her voice telling me to watch my step. That contrast always hit Tieu hard. He could remember the foster mother's warmth clearly, but his own past was a locked room. Do you remember how you met her? Tieu asked. He paused, then shook his head. Not exactly. Tieu leaned back against the counter. I met her while working near the agency, she said. She was the one who sheltered you when you refused to go to the hospital. You were bleeding and stubborn and you didn't trust anyone. His mouth twitched, almost amused. That sounds like me. It does, Tieu agreed, a faint smile appearing. A cough escaped him, rough and sudden. Tieu immediately frowned. See? You're still coughing. You need warmer clothes. It's that season. He glanced down at himself. I'm used to light clothes. Well, get unused, she said, firm but caring. I'm not letting you get sick in my house. Right then, Dee wandered in, drawn by the smell like the kitchen was a magnet. He climbed onto a stool, grabbed a mandarin and started peeling it with intense concentration. Uncle, Dee announced proudly, I can peel it all by myself now. The man turned toward him, and his expression softened instantly. Yeah? Let me see. Dewey peeled too deep and ripped the skin, then frowned like he'd been betrayed. The man chuckled and leaned closer. Here, he said, guiding Dewey's small fingers. Slow. Like this. Dewey watched him like he was learning a secret trick. Oh, he whispered, impressed. Tieu stood there watching, and something in her chest loosened. This wasn't a grand reunion. It wasn't a miracle, but it was relief. Real, quiet relief. When the cabbage rolls were done, the man took the meat outside and lit the grill. The embers glowed orange-red. Smoke rose into the cold air and drifted through the yard, carrying that rich, mouth-watering smell that makes a place feel alive. Tieu bounced around him, holding bananas like prizes. "You're grilling?" he asked, eyes bright. "Yeah," the man said. "You hungry?" "I'm always hungry," Tieu declared, as if this was an official fact. Tieu brought the table out, set bowls and chopsticks, arranged rice and small side dishes. The wind pushed against the windows, cold enough to hear it whistle. But the yard felt warm. Firelight, smoke, movement, voices. When the meat finally browned and sizzled, even Tieu felt her stomach tighten. They sat down together, and Tieu didn't wait. He stuffed his mouth, cheeks full, then immediately gave his verdict like a food critic. "It's so good!" Tieu shouted through chewing. The man laughed, startled by how loud joy could be. "Eat slowly," he warned, but he couldn't hide his smile. Tieu pointed at him with a greasy finger. "You have to eat a lot too. You're tired." That simple sentence hit the man harder than it should have. He looked at Tieu for a long moment, and for a second his expression turned into something older, something instinctive and protective, like a father looking at his child without realizing why the feeling was so strong. He cleared his throat and ate. The meal settled into that familiar rhythm of shared dinners, small clinks, the occasional "pass me that," Tieu's constant commentary, and the quiet comfort of not eating alone. Halfway through, the man asked almost casually, "What about Tieu's father?" The air shifted. Tieu didn't freeze, but her hands slowed. Her gaze dropped to her bowl. Tieu, thankfully, was too busy destroying a piece of meat to notice. "He's not around," Tieu said quietly. The man waited, not pushing, but his eyes stayed on her. Tieu took a breath. "He sold things," she admitted. "Valuables, anything he could. Gambling, always gambling." The man's jaw tightened. "And he left after that." "He disappeared," Tieu said. "And I was alone with a child." Tieu looked up then, blinking, confused by the mood. "My dad is gone?" Tieu forced a gentle smile. "Eat your food, Tieu. Don't worry about grown-up problems." But the man didn't let the conversation disappear completely. He lowered his voice. "And you met me after?" Tieu nodded. "After? And you helped? Tieu started seeing you like..." She hesitated, choosing the least painful truth. "Like a father. Kids do that when someone shows up for them." The man's eyes flicked to Tieu, who was now drinking water too fast and coughing, dramatic as ever. Without thinking, the man reached out and patted Tieu's back. Steady, gentle. Tieu coughed once more, then grinned. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Tieu said automatically, and the man echoed her just as automatic. "You're not fine." They both paused for half a second, surprised they'd spoken the same words. Tieu laughed. "Mum and Uncle talk the same." Tieu looked away, cheeks warming. The man cleared his throat and focused on his bowl. After a few bites, he murmured, almost to himself, "It's strange." "What?" Tieu asked softly. "This feeling," he said. "Like I should remember more. Like there's a whole life behind me and I can't reach it." Tieu's chest tightened. "I know." He met her eyes. "But I'm glad I'm here," he said, "even if I don't remember." Tieu nodded. "Me too." Tieu, sensing the seriousness without understanding, shoved a soft piece of meat toward him. "Here," he insisted. "This one is soft. You'll like it." The man took it. His expression softened again. "Thank you." Tieu puffed out his chest. "I take care of you." Tieu felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Because that was the thing. She'd taken care of Tieu alone for so long. Now Tieu, small as he was trying to take care of him. And he, the man with no memory, was still trying to take care of them. Later, Tieu's energy crashed. He rubbed his eyes and leaned against the man without even asking permission, trusting like it was the most natural thing in the world. Tieu reached out, ready to carry him inside, but the man stood first. "I've got him," he said. "You're tired," Tieu protested. "I'm used to it," he replied. And before she could argue, he lifted Tieu carefully into his arms. Tieu mumbled something sleepy and curled closer. Tieu watched them cross the threshold, and something inside her shifted. Not a miracle, not a sudden return of the past, but a turning point. The loneliness didn't disappear, but it had company now, and in the quiet glow of that ordinary night, fruit, fire, food, soft voices, there was a promise in the air, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. A promise that maybe, little by little, what was lost could be found again.